Hello there, I'm LRJ Chess, and I'd like to welcome you to the year 2025. We're going to get started right off with the middle game of a chess game. We're hitting the ground running right after we finished everything we can about the opening at the end of 2024. So now, in the middle game, you're going to learn a bunch of things. We'll have tactics, we'll have evaluation, planning, attacking, and so much more. The middle game is the main part of a chess game. And honestly, it's the most complex. We're going to be spending a lot of time here, so many of the future videos will be about middle game strategies. So without further ado, let's just get started. So, as it may be obvious, the middle game happens right after the opening. So basically, the stage has been set. You've developed all of your pieces, you've taken control of the center, hopefully. You've protected your king, once again, hopefully. And now it's time for you to attack. Now, if you haven't achieved one of those first two, then you probably want to do that first. But otherwise, you can start looking at attacking the enemy king or advancing your own position. But how do you know specifically when a middle game starts? I like to consider one saying, and that is the middle game begins when the rooks are connected. Basically, when you've moved all of your pieces off the first rank, except for your rooks and I guess your king, to the point where after you have castled, your rooks now defend each other, that means your rooks are connected. And that essentially signals the end of an opening phase and the beginning of a middle game phase. There are three very important considerations to keep in mind in the middle game. The first and foremost is king safety. You need your king to be safe if you want to succeed in the middle game. The second is material count. It always helps if you are winning in material, and I'll have a few strategies that you can benefit from knowing when you're winning in material or if you're losing in material and how to fight back. And the third one is piece activity. So this one stems from the opening where you want to have your pieces developed and attacking the center, but having more active pieces will allow you to attack your opponent, whether it be on the king side or the queen side. More active pieces is always a good thing, and you never want your pieces to be passive, because that just means your army isn't working for you. Now, these three factors are some of the most important things that you want to consider in a chess game, and they're also 3 of the 5 factors that I use in my evaluation strategy. Now, what is evaluation, you may ask? Well, that's exactly what I want to teach you in this lesson. To start out the middle game, we're going to start with evaluation. Essentially, I'm going to show you how to think about different middle game positions and assess who is stronger or weaker, or who is better in the position. So, what does evaluation mean? Just that word by itself. Well, it means to assess or determine something's significance. Is it good or bad? Will it be easy or hard to achieve? Those are types of questions that you think about in life, but also ones that you think about in chess. On each move in a chess game, you need to think about which move you want to play. Now, here comes evaluation. After that one move, you want to think, is that a good or a bad move? Hopefully, you'll be able to make an educated guess on what your opponent may play. In that case, you have your move and your opponent's move. You then want to think, all right, if I make this move and my opponent responds this way, will this be good or bad for me? That's another step of evaluation. If you think it's good, then you may be okay playing that move. If you think your opponent's move is really good, you probably don't want to play your own move. You probably want to find a different move. Essentially, when you're playing in chess, you're doing something called calculating. So in your head, you think of a move you want to play. You think of a response your opponent would do against you. You then figure out how you would respond to that response, and you go back and forth until the line ends, like you can't see any way forward, or until you just can't visualize it, as in you just can't see the board or the position in your head anymore. Once you get to that point, you want to try and evaluate that situation and see if it's good for you or not good for you. Obviously, you want to pick the line and the variation that's good for you. Calculating correctly and quickly is probably one of the most important things you can do in a chess game, because every move you'll want to try and play the right move while still keeping time on your clock. Remember that in tournament games, they'll be timed. So you could theoretically spend a bunch of time calculating in a regular game without a clock and find the best move, but that might not be possible in a tournament game where you're timed, where you might have 30 or 60 minutes to play the entire game. That's why training calculation is a really, really important thing to do if you want to get better at chess. To improve your calculation skills, you need to be able to evaluate positions correctly. This is why these two things go hand in hand in a chess game: calculating and evaluating. You calculate a move or variation, and then you evaluate whether it's good or not. If it's good, you play it. If it's not, you go back to step one and calculate something else. This process is a constant through chess. So, how do you evaluate in chess? I think there are 5 important factors that you can use to figure out if a position is good or bad for you. These 5 factors are as follows. First, material status or material count. Second, piece activity and development. Third is king safety. Fourth is pawn structure. And fifth is enemy threats. Together, these 5 things will most likely tell you what you need to know about the position. Let's dig into them a little bit further. First, material status is kind of obvious. If you have extra material, if you're winning in material, you're probably winning in the game. I say probably because that's not always the case, and I'll show you why. Second, we have piece mobility and development, which I talked about before. If your pieces are more active, it'll be a lot easier for you to attack. Same with king safety. If your king is safer, it won't be able to be attacked. If your opponent's king is weak, then he can be attacked. Fourth is pawn structure, and that may seem a little odd, but the reason why that one is so important is because if your pawn structure is good, you'll be able to control a lot of squares. If your pawns are really messed up, which is something we'll look at in another video, you'll be able to see how weak your position can get. Everything on pawn structure will be pushed further into another video. Last is enemy threats. That one's just looking at your opponent's position and seeing what he can attack of yours. Can he put your king in check? Can he take any of your pieces? Can he do any tactics? Things that we'll look at in the video after this. Now, something important to keep in mind is this is not something where majority rules, where if you have 3 out of the 5 things, then you're better. We can imagine a position where your king is safer, you have more active pieces, you have better pawn structure, your opponent has no threats, but you're down a queen. You're probably going to lose that game, even though you're winning 4-1 on the majority rules. This 5-factor evaluation technique is really a guide to help you figure out who is better in a position. It gives you the most important things that you can see, and then you have to be the one to make that final decision. What do you think matters more? Piece activity and king safety, or an extra pawn? It'll be different in every position, but by having those 5 factors of evaluation, you're more likely to be able to come to the correct conclusion. I've done a lot of talking to start this video, so I think it's a good time that we go and look at some examples to practice this way of evaluation. Let's head on over to the board and start with an easy example. We'll work through this one together to start. So this will be your first position to evaluate. On the screen, you'll see the 5 factors of evaluation. I would like you to pause the video and try and think through each of the 5 factors to determine who is better. Remember, these 5 are material status, pawn structure, piece activity or development, king safety, and enemy threats. If you need more time, remember to pause the video, otherwise we're going to take a look through this position. Alright, so here it is white's turn to move. As we look at the material status first, you can see that white has an extra pawn. Both sides have a queen, 2 rooks, and 2 bishops, but white has 6 pawns, while black only has 5. For pawn structure, it's pretty equal. However, white has an extra central pawn, so he controls the center more. That might lean it in favor of white as well. For piece activity or development, it kind of seems like both sides are equal. White has his queen and his bishop developed, while black has his 2 bishops developed. We can leave that as equal. For king safety, definitely white. His king has gotten castled, and it's in the corner protected by 3 pawns. Black's king is also protected by 3 pawns, however, he can no longer castle. So Black's king is a little bit weaker than White's king. That means White has better king safety. And for enemy threats, if we look at this position, all of White's pieces are actually defended, which is a really, really important thing, and Black doesn't have any threats here. So our final evaluation of the 5 factors, we see that White has more material, the pawn structure is somewhat equal, or White's a little better, the piece activity and development is equal, White's king is safer, and Black has no threats. So the final answer here would be that White is better. White may not yet be winning, but White is definitely better. If you think you're getting the hang of these 5 factors and want to try another position, let's move on to a harder one. This will be the second evaluation position we'll look at, and it definitely is crazy compared to the first one. There is a lot of stuff going on here, so it'll take time to work through everything. This is a puzzle designed to be difficult and one that high-level players can figure out, but beginner and intermediate players may struggle with. Don't worry, though, as long as you can correctly evaluate this position, you're definitely on the right track. Either way, after taking some time, we'll review this one together, and hopefully you'll be able to understand it a lot better. If you need more time to think about this position, please pause the video to get all your thoughts written out, because there is a lot here. But let's start to work through this position factor by factor. A big difference between the first position and this position is that the first position was pretty easy to evaluate without looking at specific variations. For this puzzle, an evaluation alone won't necessarily get you the right answer. It would have to be accompanied with variations, and then you would be able to see who is better. We'll focus on the evaluation right now, and then I'll explain the moves, and hopefully that will make more sense. Sometimes in chess, I think it's worth looking at harder positions and struggling through them, because by the time you get to the end, you'll have definitely learned something. With that, let's go through these 5 factors. So first, material status. White is up by 2 pawns, White has 6 pawns, and Black only has 4. So that's going to be in White's favor. For pawn structure, I'd say White is better. He has 3 pawns on the king side and 3 pawns on the queen side, while Black's pawns are scattered around the board. For piece activity and development, I'd definitely say Black is better. It seems like a lot of his pieces are in the center, pointed in the same direction, or even ready to attack the enemy king, while White's pieces are somewhat scattered around the board. Notice the rook on g1 and the knight on f7. They aren't really doing anything right now. The only 3 good pieces are the white bishop, rook on c1, and queen on a3, because they all point toward the queen side, where the black king is. I'd say Black is better in the piece activity and development factor. Look at this rook, and this bishop, and this queen and rook file as well. These are all very strong. For king safety, I'd say Black is definitely better. Even though he only has 1 pawn protecting his king, and there's an enemy queen on the same file as the king, notice how Black has a lot of defense around his king. The bishop, the queen, and the rook all provide defense, while the white king doesn't really have as much. He can't castle on either side because his rooks have moved. The bishop on a6 also cuts these squares away from the king, while the rook cuts the d file away from the king. So something really important to see here is that the white king can't move. Do you have any ideas what that could imply in this position? Well, if the rook and the bishop cut off the king, those pieces need to stay there. However, if we could get one of our other pieces, either our knight on f6, or queen on b7, or our rook on b8, if we could get them somewhere to check the king, that would be checkmate, because the king can't go anywhere. So that's something to keep in mind as we start calculating variations. But we still have one more factor to look at: enemy threats. White does have threats in this position, so we have to think about them. In a future video, we'll talk about something called candidate moves, which in my opinion is the best way to find your opponent's threats and to find your best move. We'll focus on that on a later video, but for now, I'll just tell you some of them. First, white may want to play knight to d6. This square is protected by the pawn, and it would attack the black queen on b7, and get the knight closer to our king. White may also want to play the move pawn to c6. That pawn is protected by the rook on c1, and this would attack our queen. These are two potential threats that white would have, both attacking our queen. So as we go through all the 5 factors now, white is winning in material. He has 2 extra pawns. White has a better pawn structure. Black's piece activity and development are better. Black's king safety is better. And white does have a couple of threats that we have to be worried about. This is a clear example of when you evaluate using these 5 factors, how majority rules is not always true. White is better on 3 out of these 5 things, but white is actually losing in this position. The reason why is the piece activity and development and king safety factors are so important here. Let's try and figure out what black should do to win this game. So remember when I was talking about how the white king is cut off by the rook and the bishop? Well, if we can get one of our other pieces to give check, it'll be checkmate. So what could we do? We have an immediate check with queen to b4, but this would fail because the white queen could capture our queen. We can't give a check with our rook or our knight, but we can actually move our knight somewhere to get closer to a check. Taking a look at this knight on f6, if we could move him to any square on the board, which square would you put him on to make it checkmate? Now, it doesn't have to be a legal move. I'm just asking if you could pick him up and plop him on any square. Which one would be checkmate? If you said the square f3, you would be correct. Notice how if the knight gets over here on f3, it checks the king, and the bishop on a6 still blocks e2 and f1, and the rook on d5 still blocks d2 and d1, and the knight can't be captured, and a knight's check can't be blocked. So this would be checkmate. All right, what that means is we now have a game plan. If we can somehow get our knight to that square, we would checkmate him. Now, of course, white won't allow this to happen. But we have another idea that white has to be careful about. If black plays the move queen to b5, this queen and bishop combination could go to e2 and checkmate the king as well. So these are 2 different things that white has to be worried about. After explaining this position a little bit more, let's see the correct first move. If you said the move knight to g4, you would be right. The idea here is to get the knight to this h2 square because that's the safest route to be able to go to f3. We would like to go to e5 as well. The problem is that the white knight guards that square. You may be wondering, this knight on f7 is undefended and black could take it. Why did black not capture this knight? It looks like it was free. The reason why is because the queen on b7 was guarding the bishop on a6. If the queen moves to f7, it's no longer guarding the bishop. So white could play queen takes a6. In a later strategy video, you will learn that exchanging material is a good thing to do when you're winning in material. So this would actually benefit white. He has 2 extra pawns, so trading is good for white. That's why black chose knight g4 over queen takes f7. In this position, white responded with knight to d6, counterattacking the black queen. However, Black has a brilliant move here. He can just ignore the attack on his queen and play knight takes h2. Remember Black's whole idea with knight to f3 checkmate. If white were to capture this queen on b7, knight f3 is checkmate. We don't even need our queen to deliver the final blow. What that means is that after knight takes h2, white cannot capture our queen. He has to try and open up a square for his king, so he plays the move f4. This opens up the f2 square for the king. Now that our queen is actually being threatened, Black plays queen to c6 to get it out of the attack. White goes rook d1, trying to trade off that strong rook on d5. Knight f3. This is a fork, a tactic that we'll look at in the next video. King goes to f2. Knight takes g1. Now Black has actually won material. Rook takes g1. Rook takes d6. It looks like Black is sacrificing back his rook, but he has figured out a way to end the game. After white captures the rook, this opens the queen to be able to go to c2 and give check. The king has to go to f3, which is its only square. The bishop goes to b7 and controls this entire diagonal. King goes to g4, once again, the only square possible. The black queen goes to e2 and gives a check. King to h3, once again, the only square possible. And now can you find a checkmate in one move? Black can top off this whole attack with one final move and end the game right here. Black does have a few moves to give check, like bishop g2, queen g2, queen h2, queen g4, queen h5, and g4. I will give a correction, Black has a lot of checks. However, we can remove a couple of them because they get the queen taken. So we'll remove queen g2, queen h2, and queen g4. We can remove bishop g2 because that will get the bishop taken by the rook. If we play the move g4, that would open up the h4 square for the king, so this is not checkmate. But if we play queen h5, this is checkmate. Together with the bishop, the queen attacks the king and prevents it from going to any square. It can't go anywhere on the h-file, and it can't go anywhere on the diagonal because that's covered by the bishop, so this is checkmate. What that means is, all the way back in this position, we can now figure out exactly how Black is winning. Notice how if you just look at this position, it's not so clear that Black is winning. White has 2 extra pawns, but Black has the potential for an attack. It's only after we calculated variations that we actually saw that Black was winning. However, the reason why going through these 5 factors was so important is because we realized that Black needs to attack. With the weak white king and the black pieces pointing at the king, especially the fact that the bishop and rook cut off the king from every square, this points to the fact that Black can win this game through an attack, especially considering we said that the white pieces were scattered around the board when we were looking at the piece activity and development factor. So this is how evaluating chess positions can help your game. We'll go through a lot more examples in future videos, but for now, let's head back to the main lesson. And we're back. So the type of position that you saw in the first example is more likely what you'll see in actual chess games. One side is better, and by going through the 5 factors of evaluation, you'll be able to figure that out pretty easily, and you'll get to the correct conclusion the majority of the time. The second position, however, well, that one was just meant to be confusing. And honestly, that's what will happen in some chess games. You'll get to a position, you'll go through your 5 factors of evaluation, and you just won't have a clue. Now, unless you are a high-level chess player, the correct moves might not have come to you very quickly. But what I would like you to notice is how after we evaluated the position, and we decided who was better in what, we definitely saw that Black had better piece activity and a slightly safer king. So if he can use that piece activity to attack the white king, maybe he can make something of that position. So because of that, as we started playing through the moves, hopefully you saw how everything fell into place after a couple moves. From that wild position, it only took a few moves before we saw black was completely winning. Now, if you're not able to evaluate that from the starting position, that's okay. Remember I said this was a very difficult example. The key was to see how we evaluated the position and then how we calculated lines and approached a winning game for black, in which once you evaluate that one, it's easy to see that black is winning. These two examples perfectly highlight how important evaluation is in a chess game. Different chess players may have different ways of calculating variations, and different coaches may have different ways of teaching calculation, which is all well and good. But the one thing every chess player needs to have in tip-top shape is their ability to evaluate a position. If you can calculate all the moves correctly, but incorrectly evaluate that it's losing for you instead of winning, you won't play the move. That's why your evaluation needs to be something that is always correct. It's going to be really hard to do, but that's why we're going to practice it. That's the main goal. Now, of course, perfecting your evaluation is going to be a very long process. But one of the things that you can do to help this along is to practice your visualization skills. That's basically when you're calculating a variation, can you see that in your head? You don't need to close your eyes and look at it. Some grandmasters look at the ceiling. But the point is that if you look at a board, can you visualize the pieces moving on the board without actually moving them yourself? That's a really good skill to have when you're playing chess, because the better you can visualize, the easier it will be for you to evaluate that position. You can just see it in your head. So to start out this lesson from 2025, I definitely did do a lot of talking, but let me know if you would like some more examples on calculation, evaluation, or visualization. We're definitely going to get to those three throughout our future videos, but if you need more right now, just let me know. Otherwise, on the next video, we're going to start looking at tactical motifs. We're not going to be jumping into specific middle game strategies right away, because there's something you need to set the stage first. In chess, tactics are one of the most important things that you can use in a chess game. Those are ways to win material or checkmate the opponent. Different strategies to do that. So what we're going to do is have a 3-part lesson looking at different tactical motifs and training you to recognize these in your own games. Once we've gotten through our little tactics boot camp, then we'll move on to specific middle game strategies. But until then, this is LRJ Chess, signing off with a checkmate.